9. The gunslinger didn't tell the boy any of this, but perhaps most of it came through anyway. He had already realized that this was an extremely perceptive boy, not so different from Elaine, who was strong in that half empathy, half telepathy they called the touch. "You asleep?" the gunslinger asked. "No." "Do you understand what I told you?" "Understand it?" the boy asked with a surprising scorn. "Understand it? Are you kidding?" "No." But the gunslinger felt defensive. He had never told anyone about his coming of age because he felt ambivalent about it. Of course, the hawk had been a perfectly acceptable weapon, yet it had been a trick too, a betrayal, the first of many. "And tell me, am I really preparing to throw this boy at the man in black?" "I understood it all right," the boy said. "It was a game, wasn't it? Do grown men always have to play games? Does everything have to be an excuse for another kind of game? Do any men grow up, or do they only come of age?" "You don't know everything," the gunslinger said, trying to hold his slow anger. "You're just a boy." "Sure, but I know what I am to you." "And what is that?" the gunslinger asked, tightly. "A poker chip." The gunslinger felt an urge to find a rock and brain the boy. Instead, he spoke calmly. "Go to sleep. Boys need their sleep." And in his mind, he heard Martin's echo. "Go and find your hand." He sat stiffly in the darkness, stunned with horror and terrified, for the first time in his existence, of the self-loathing that might come afterward. 10. During the next period of walking, the railway angle closed to the underground river, and they came upon the sloped mutants. Jake saw the first one and screamed aloud. The gunslinger's head, which had been fixed straight forward as he pumped the handcar, jerked to the right. There was a rotten jack-o'-lantern greenness below them, pulsating faintly. For the first time he became aware of the odor. Faint, unpleasant, wet. The greenness was a face. What might be called a face by one of charitable bent. Above the flattened nose was an insectite node of eyes, peering at them expressionlessly. The gunslinger felt an atavistic crawl in his intestines and privates. He stepped up the rhythm of arms and handcar handle slightly. The glowing face faded. "What in the hell was that?" the boy asked, crawling to him. "What?" The words stopped, dumb in his throat, as they came upon, then past, a group of 3 faintly glowing forms, standing between the rails and the invisible river, watching them, motionless. "They're slow mutants," the gunslinger said. "I don't think they'll bother us. They're probably just as frightened of us as we are of—" One of the forms broke free and shambled towards them. The face was that of a starving idiot. The faint, naked body had been transformed into a knotted mess of tentacular limbs and suckers. The boy screamed again and crowed against the gunslinger's leg like a frightened dog. One of the thing's tentacle arms pawed across the flat platform of the handcar. It reeked of the wet and the dark. The gunslinger let loose of the handle and drew. He put a bullet through the forehead of the starving idiot's face. It fell away, its faint swamp fire glow fading, an eclipsed moon. The gun flash lay bright and branded in their dark retinas, fading only reluctantly. The smell of expended powder was hot and savage, and alien in this buried place. There were others, more of them. None moved against them overtly, but they were closing in on the tracks, a silent, hideous party of rubberneckers. "You may have to pump for me," the gunslinger said. "Can you?" "Yes." "Then be ready." The boy stood close to him, his body poised. His eyes took in the slow mutants only as they passed, not traversing, not seeing more than they had to. The boy assumed a physic bulge of terror, as if his very id somehow sprung out through his pores to form a shield. If he had the touch, the gunslinger reasoned, that was not impossible. The gunslinger pumped steadily, but did not increase his speed. The slow mutants could smell their terror. He knew that, but he doubted if terror alone would be enough to motivate them. He and the boy were, after all, creatures of delight and whole. How they must hate us, he thought, and wondered if they had hated the man in black in the same way. He thought not, or perhaps he had passed among them only like the shadow of a dark wing in this great darkness. The boy made a noise in his throat, and the gunslinger turned his head almost casually. 4 of them were charging the handcar in a stumbling way, one of them in the process of finding a hand grip. The gunslinger let go of the handle and drew again, with the same sleepy, casual motion. He shot the mutant in the head. The mutant made a sighing, sobbing noise and began to grin. Its hands were limp and fish-like, dead. The fingers clove to one another like the fingers of a glove, long immersed in a drying mud. One of these corpse hands found the boy's foot and began to pull. The boy shrieked aloud in the granite wound. The gunslinger shot the mutant in the chest. It began to slobber through the grin. Jake was going off to the side. The gunslinger caught one of his arms and was almost pulled off balance himself. The thing was surprisingly strong. The gunslinger put another bullet in the mutant's head. One eye went out like a candle. Still, it pulled. They engaged in a silent tug of war for Jake's jerking, wriggling body. The slow mutants yanked on him like a wishbone. The wish would undoubtedly be to dine. The handcar was slowing down. The others began to close in. The lame, the halt, the blind. Perhaps they only looked for our Jesus to heal them, to raise them like Lazarus from the darkness. It's the end for the boy, the gunslinger thought with perfect coldness. It's the end he meant. Let go and pump or hold on and be buried. The end for the boy. He gave a tremendous yank on the boy's arm and shot the mutant in the belly. For one frozen moment its grip grew even tighter and Jake began to slide off the edge again. Then the dead mud mitts loosened, and the slow mutie fell on its face behind the slowing down handcar, still grinning. "I thought you'd leave me," the boy was sobbing. I thought... "Hold on to my belt," the gunslinger said. "Hold on just as tight as you can." The hand worked into his belt and clutched there. The boy was breathing in great convulsive silent gasps. The gunslinger began to pump steadily again, and the handcar picked up speed. The slow mutants fell back a step and watched him go with faces hardly human, or pathetically so. Faces that generated the weak phosphorescence common to those weird deep-sea fishes that lived under incredible black pressure, faces that held no anger or hate, but only what seemed to be a semi-conscious, idiot regret. "They're thinning," the gunslinger said. The drawn-up muscles of his lower belly and privates relaxed the smallest bit. There, the slow mutants had put up rocks across the tracks. The way was blocked. It had been a quick, poor job, but perhaps the work only of a minute to clear. But they were stopped, and someone would have to get down and move them. The boy moaned and shuddered closer to the gunslinger. The gunslinger let go of the handle, and the handcar coasted noiselessly to the rocks, where it thumped to rest. The slow mutants began to close in again, almost casually, almost as if they had been passing by, lost in a dream of darkness, and had found someone of whom to ask directions, a street corner congregation of the damned beneath the ancient rock. "Are they going to get us?" the boy asked, calmly. "Never in life. Be quiet a second." He looked at the rocks. The mutants were weak, of course, and had not been able to drag any of the boulders to block their way. Only small rocks, only enough to stop them, to make someone... "Get down," the gunslinger said. "You have to move them. I'll cover you." "No," the boy whispered. "Please." "I can't give you a gun, and I can't move the rocks and shoot too. You have to get down." Jake's eyes rolled terribly. For a moment his body shuddered in a tune with the turnings of his mind, and then he wriggled over to the side and began to throw rocks to the right and to the left, working with mad speed, not looking up. The gunslinger drew and waited. 2 of them, lurching rather than walking, went for the boy with arms like dough. The guns did their work, stitching the darkness with red-white lances of light that pushed needles of pain into the gunslinger's eyes. The boy screamed and continued to throw rocks away to either side. Witch glow leaped and danced. Hard to see now. That was the worst. Everything had gone to shadows and after images. One of them, glowing hardly at all, suddenly reached for the boy with rubber boogeyman arms. Eyes that ate up half the muty's head rolled wetly. Jake screamed again and turned to struggle. The gunslinger fired without allowing himself to think before his spotty vision could betray his hands into a terrible quiver. The two heads were only inches apart. It was the muty who fell. Jake threw rocks wildly. The mutants milled just outside the invisible line of trespass, closing a little at a time, now very close. Others had caught up, swelling their numbers. "All right," the gunslinger said. "Get on, quick." When the boy moved, the mutants came at him. Jake was over the side and scrambling to his feet. The gunslinger was already pumping again, all out. Both guns were holstered now. They must run. It was their only chance. Strange hands slapped the metal plane of the car's surface. The boy was holding his belt with both hands now, his face pressed tightly into the small of the gunslinger's back. A group of them ran onto the tracks, their faces full of that mindless, casual anticipation. The gunslinger was full of adrenaline. The car was flying along the tracks in the darkness. They struck the 4 or 5 pitfall hulks with force. They flew like rotten bananas struck from the steam. On and on into the soundless, flying, banshee darkness. After an age, the boy raised his face into the Made wind, dreading and yet needing to know. The ghost of the gun flashes still lingered on his retinas. There was nothing to see but the darkness, and nothing to hear but the rumble of the river. "They're gone," the boy said, suddenly fearing an end to the tracks in the darkness, and then wounding crash as they jumped the rails and plunged to the twisted ruin. He had ridden in cars. Once, his humorless father had driven at 90 on the New Jersey Turnpike and had been stopped by a cop who ignored the 20 Elmer Chambers offered with his license and gave him a ticket anyway. But he had never ridden like this, with the wind and the blindness and the terrors behind and ahead, with the sound of the river like a clucking voice, the voice of the man in black. The gunslinger's arms were pistons in a lunatic human factory. "They're gone," the boy said timidly, the words ripped from his mouth by the wind. "You can slow down now. We left them behind." But the gunslinger did not hear. They careened onward into the strange dark. 11. They went on for 3 days without incident. 12. During the 4th period of walking, halfway through, 3/4, they didn't know, knew only that they weren't tired enough yet to stop. There was a sharp thump beneath them, and the handcar swayed, and their bodies immediately leaned to the right against the gravity as the rails took a gradual turn to the left. There was a light ahead, a glow so faint and alien that it seemed at first to be a totally new element, not earth, not air, not fire, not water. It had no color and could only be discerned by the fact that they had regained their hands and their faces in a dimension beyond that of touch. Their eyes had become so light-sensitive that they noticed the glow more than 5 miles before they approached its source. "The end," the boy said tightly. "It's the end." "No," the gunslinger spoke with odd assurance. "It isn't." And it wasn't. They reached the light, but not they. As they approached the source of the glow, they saw for the first time that the rock wall to the left had fallen away and that tracks had been joined by others which crossed in a complex spiderweb. The light laid them in burnished vectors. On some of them there were dark boxcars, passenger coaches, a stage that had been adapted to rails. They made the gunslinger nervous, like ghost galleons trapped in an underground sargasso. The light grew stronger now, hurting their eyes a little, but growing slowly enough to allow them to adapt. They came from dark to light, like divers coming up from deep fathoms in slow stages. Ahead, drawing nearer, was a huge hangar stretching up into the dark. Cut into it, showing yellow squares of light, were a series of perhaps 24 entranceways, growing from the size of toy windows to a height of 20 feet as they drew closer. They passed inside through one of the middle ways. Written above were a series of characters in various languages, the gunslinger presumed. He was astounded to find that he could read the last one. It was an ancient root of high speech itself, and it said, "Track 10 to surface and points west." The light inside was brighter. The tracks met and merged through a series of switchings. Here, some of the traffic lanterns still worked, flashing eternal reds and greens and ambers. They rolled between the rising stone piers, cocked back with the passage of thousands of vehicles, and then they were in some kind of central terminal. The gunslinger let the handcar coast slowly to a stop, and they peered around. "It's like a subway," the boy said. "Subway? Never mind. You wouldn't know what I was talking about. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Not anymore." The boy climbed up onto the cracked cement. They looked at silent, deserted booths where newspaper and books were once traded or sold. A bootery, a weapon shop. The gunslinger, suddenly feverish with excitement, saw revolvers and rifles. Closer inspection showed that their barrels had been filled with lead. He did, however, pick out a bow, which he slung over his back, and a quiver of almost useless, badly weighted arrows. A woman's apparel shop. Somewhere a converter was turning air over and over, as if it had for 1,000 years, but perhaps would not for much longer. It had a grating noise somewhere in its cycle, which served to remind that perpetual motion, even under strictly controlled conditions, was still a fool's dream. The air had a mechanized taste. The boy's shoes and the gunslinger's boots made flat echoes. The boy cried out, "Hey! Hey!" The gunslinger turned around and went to him. The boy was standing, transfixed, at the bookstall. Inside, sprawled in a far corner, was a mummy. It was wearing a blue uniform with gold piping, a trainman's uniform by the look. There was an ancient, perfectly preserved newspaper on the dead thing's lap, and it crumbled to dust when the gunslinger touched it. The mummy's face was like an old, shriveled-up apple. Cautiously, the gunslinger touched the cheek. There was a small puff of dust. When it cleared, they were able to look at the flesh into the mummy's mouth. A gold tooth twinkled there. "Gas," the gunslinger murmured. "The old people made a gas that would do this. Or so Vinay told us." "The one who taught from books?" "Yes, he." "I bet these old people fought wars with it," the boy said darkly. "Killed other old people with it." "I'm sure you're right." There were perhaps a dozen other mummies. All but 2 or 3 were wearing the blue and gold ornamental uniforms. The gunslinger supposed that the gas had been used when this place was empty of most incoming and outgoing traffic. Perhaps, once in a dim ago, the station had been a military objective of some long-gone army and cause. The thought depressed him. "We better go on," he said, and started towards the track 10 and the handcar again. But the boy stood rebelliously behind him. "Not going!" The gunslinger turned back, surprised. The boy's face was twisted and trembling. "You won't get what you want until I'm dead. I'll take my chances by myself." The gunslinger nodded noncommittedly, hating himself for what he was going to do. "Okay, Jake," he said mildly. "Long days and pleasant nights." He turned around, walked across the stone piers, leaped easily down to the handcar. "You made a deal with someone!" the boy screamed after him. "I know you did!" The gunslinger, not replying, carefully put the bow in front of the T-post, rising out of the handcar's floor, out of harm's way. The boy's fists were clenched, his features drawn in agony. "How easily you bluff this young boy," the gunslinger told himself. Again and again, his wonderful intuition, his touch, has led him to this point, and again you have led him past it. And how difficult could it be, after all? He has no friends but you. In a sudden, simple thought, almost a vision, it came to him that all he had to do was give it over, turn around, take the boy with him, and make him the center of a new force. The tower did not have to be obtained in this humiliating, nose-rubbing way, did it? Let his quest resume after the boy had grown of years, when the two of them could cast the man in black aside like a cheap wind-up toy. Surely, he thought cynically, surely. He knew with sudden coldness that turning backwards would mean the death for both of them. Death, or worse, entombment with the slow mutants behind them, decay of all faculties. with perhaps the guns of his father living long after both of them, kept in rotten splendor as totems, not unlike the unforgotten gas pump. Show some guts, he told himself falsely. He reached for the handle and began to pump it. The handcar moved away from the stone piers. The boy screamed, "Wait!" and began running on the diagonal toward where the handcar would emerge nearer the darkness ahead. The gunslinger had an impulse to speed up, leave the boy alone, yet last with uncertainty. Instead, he caught him as he leaped. The heart beneath the thin shirt thumped and fluttered as Jake clung to him. The end was very close now. Thank you guys for sitting with us for another part of Majin reading The Dark Tower of the Gunslinger. Tomorrow, hopefully, we will reach the conclusion of Jake's journey with the Gunslinger, and we will see what the Gunslinger's choice will be when he is confronted with whether or not he will choose his quest, or the boy he loves but now refuses to even acknowledge in name. Long days and pleasant nights, listener.